The wind blew hotly as Isabel stepped out of the car in front of the imposing wooden house. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see, rows of soybeans dancing in the sun. For a moment, she wondered if this was truly the same patch of dry land she had once despised. Her heels sank lightly into the earth, and the distant sound of farm machinery seemed to mock her fall. She felt small compared to the empire her brother had built. Rafael appeared on the porch, dressed simply, with a look of surprise and wariness in his eyes. He hadn't expected to see her there, especially after a decade of silence and resentment. The memory of her harsh words echoed in his mind, but he suppressed any reaction. He simply said, "Welcome, Isabel." His calm voice contrasted with the swirling emotions he hid behind his tired eyes. Isabel took a deep breath before answering, trying to maintain the composure she had lost along with her fortune. "Thank you, Rafael. I needed to see you." The sentence sounded rehearsed, almost false. He simply nodded, making way for her to enter. The fresh air of the house carried the scent of wood and freshly brewed coffee, a comforting contrast to the chilly atmosphere of their former meeting rooms. As she walked down the hallway, Isabel noticed frames of old photos of the farm, each showing the visible progress made over the years. There was pride in those images, a kind of success not measured in actions or figures. She looked away, trying not to show her discomfort. Each photograph seemed like a mirror reflecting her own defeat. Rafael led her into the main room, where a rustic, solid wood table occupied the center. "Lucia is preparing dinner," he said, breaking the silence. Isabel simply nodded, trying to ignore the lump forming in her throat. The sound of silverware coming from the kitchen seemed to echo a past she had buried. For a moment, they both stood still, like two strangers trying to decipher a forgotten bond. That evening, the sunset bathed the fields in golden hues that flooded the room through the open windows. Rafael watched the horizon, while Isabel tried to summon the courage to say something meaningful. The silence between them was thicker than any words. "The farm is beautiful," she ventured, her tone almost nostalgic. He responded with only a slight nod, his gaze never leaving the field. There was something about that moment that Isabel couldn't quite comprehend, a feeling that time had changed everything except the distance between them. She tried to start a conversation about the past, but Rafael stood up before she could continue. "Rest, Isabel. It's been a long journey." The words were gentle, but the tone was one of farewell. She watched her brother climb the stairs, the sound of his footsteps mingling with the crickets outside. The house felt alive, pulsing with memories she herself had ignored. For a moment, she considered leaving, but something inside her told her it was too late to run. There was a harvest pending, not of grain, but of regrets.
Isabel retreated to the guest room, where the scent of lavender and antique wood enveloped her. She touched the sheets gently, remembering the times they shared a room in her parents' house. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of workers' laughter, and she felt a tightness in her chest. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be alone. Outside, Rafael stood for a few minutes on the porch, gazing at the starry sky. He considered the words he wished he had said and the ones he needed to say. He knew his sister's arrival wasn't just a visit, it was a test of his heart, of his pride, and of the past he'd sworn never to revisit. Before the story continues, subscribe to the channel, because here, each story shows that even the driest lands can flourish when we believe. And perhaps, like Rafael, you too will discover that patience and faith can change everything. The dinner table was set simply: rice, beans, vegetables, and roast beef. Isabel observed every detail, as if trying to memorize a life that didn't belong to her. Lucia, always welcoming, served the dishes with a gentle smile. "It's been a while since we had a meal like this as a family," she said. Rafael remained silent, stirring the food without touching his plate. The sound of silverware became the only noise in the room. Isabel tried to find something to say, but each attempt died before it could be expressed. Finally, she ventured, "I never thought your farm would be so big." Rafael looked up slowly, studying his sister's face. "The earth is generous to those who have patience," he replied. The sentence, though calm, carried a weight that Isabel felt like a reprimand. Lucia tried to ease the tension with a conversation about the weather and the crops, but the two siblings were stuck in a silence that no triviality could break. Isabel remembered how she had laughed at Rafael's ideas, calling him a fool for investing in barren land. Now, she felt like the joke herself. She wanted to apologize, but pride still spoke louder. "You must have worked really hard to make all this happen," she commented, trying to sound neutral. Rafael placed his fork on his plate and replied, "Work was never the problem. Lack of support was." The sentence pierced the air like an invisible arrow. Isabel looked away, embarrassed. Lucia sighed discreetly, realizing the old wound was still bleeding. After dinner, Rafael stood and thanked his aunt. "It was great, Lucia. Good night." Isabel tried to follow him, but he went upstairs without looking back. She stood still, feeling the weight of her own choices. The house, now silent, seemed to judge her with every creak of wood. She realized she wasn't welcome there, not yet. Lucia approached gently and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He still feels hurt, my daughter, but time heals, if the heart wants it." Isabel nodded, fighting back tears. "I don't know if mine still knows how to love," she replied, almost in a whisper. Lucia smiled tenderly. "Then start by trying to remember what it means to ask for forgiveness."
Later, in her room, Isabel opened the window and let the night breeze in. The stars seemed closer there than anywhere she had ever lived. She thought of how many times she had looked up at the same sky, believing she was above it all. Now the universe seemed to be looking back, silent, patient, and immense. As the farm slept, Isabel made a promise to herself. She would try to repair what she had broken, even if it was too late. Her pride was beginning to fade, replaced by something harder to bear: regret. The sun had already risen when Isabel woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee. She sat up in bed, taking a few seconds to remember where she was. The simple room contrasted with the hotel suites she usually stayed in. The feeling was bittersweet, comfort mixed with humiliation. For the first time, she had no control over anything, not even her own destiny. As she sipped her coffee, prepared by Lucia, Isabel watched Rafael from afar, already wearing a hat and boots, directing the workers. He seemed to belong there, as if the land recognized him. Lucia noticed her niece's look and commented, "He found peace here, you know. It took years, but he did it." Isabel simply nodded, unsure whether to feel envy or admiration. Over coffee, flashes of the past began to flood her mind. The day she sold her car, the skeptical looks from her colleagues when they learned of her bankruptcy, the newspapers that splashed her name across the headlines. Successful executive loses everything in risky operation. The fall was as swift as the rise. And amidst the ruin, she thought of Rafael for the first time in years. Back then, he even tried calling his brother, but gave up before he heard the ring. He imagined he'd laugh, or worse, say, "I told you so." Now, looking at him from afar, he realized he might never have the right to ask for anything. Pride was an invisible prison, and it was serving its sentence. Late in the morning, Rafael entered the house with a sweaty face and dirt on his hands. Isabel hesitantly stood to help him, but he waved her off. "No need, I can manage." His tone wasn't hostile, but it cut like ice. She sat back down, helpless, feeling like an intruder in the home that had once been her refuge. As her brother washed his hands in the sink, Isabel summoned the courage to ask, "You heard about my situation, didn't you?" Rafael replied without looking at her, "Yes, news travels fast." The silence that followed was dense, almost physical. Each second seemed to weigh heavily, like a silent judgment. She tried to explain that it wasn't greed, that she'd simply trusted the wrong people, but Rafael interrupted her. "You trusted what you wanted. I trusted too. The difference is I believed in myself." The answer was calm but definitive. Isabel felt the words echo deep within her, as if a mirror had shattered.
After he left, Isabel was left alone, staring out the window at the fields. She saw a group of workers smiling, sharing stories, living simply. For the first time, she understood what Rafael had meant about believing in oneself. That once dry land seemed alive, and perhaps her heart too could still blossom. As dusk fell, Isabel walked to the barn, driven by silent curiosity. Inside, amid the smell of hay and oil, she found a dusty old painting, a photo of her and Rafael as children, holding a plant seedling. The caption written by her mother read, "The future is born small." Isabel smiled sadly. Her future had grown crooked, but perhaps there was still time to prune it. The next morning, Rafael invited Isabel to join him in the fields. She was surprised by the gesture, although she was suspicious of his intentions. She donned a hat borrowed from Lucia and boots that felt strange to her. The sun was already high as they began their walk through the vast acres of soybeans and corn. The air smelled of life and work, something Isabel hadn't smelled in a long time. Rafael showed the crops with the calm tone of someone speaking to an old friend. He explained the irrigation system, the crop rotation, and the care of the soil. Isabel listened silently, impressed. "That land was useless, Rafael," she murmured. He smiled crookedly. "All land is fertile if the heart of the one who plants it is also fertile." The sentence struck her deeper than he imagined. With every step, Isabel realized how the farm wasn't just a business, it was an extension of her brother. Every tree, every greenhouse, every detail told a story of persistence and faith. Rafael spoke little, but his gaze said it all. This was more than revenge for past slights. It was redemption. They stopped before a small lake, where the sky's reflection shimmered on the water. Rafael was silent for a moment before saying, "When I bought this land, they said I was crazy. You were one of the first to laugh." Isabel swallowed hard. "I didn't know what you saw here." He replied, "I saw possibility. You only saw dust." Isabel lowered her head, not daring to look him in the eye. I thought I was protecting you from a mistake." Rafael took a deep breath. Sometimes those who protect too much also prevent others from growing. The tone wasn't angry. It was that of someone who had learned to accept. But the words echoed like a lesson. As they walked home, Isabel noticed her brother's calloused hands. They were marks of effort, not failure. "You seem happy here," she commented. Rafael replied, "Happiness isn't what they say. It's when you sleep peacefully knowing you did your best." Isabel fell silent. Peace. It was something she hadn't felt in years. When they reached the porch, Lucia was waiting for them with fresh juice and cheese bread. The scene was simple, but there was something deeply human about it. Isabel looked out over the field one last time before entering and thought about how the sound of the wind seemed to carry voices from the past.
As if the earth itself were speaking.
That night, as she watched the moon over the fields, Isabel wrote a sentence in her notebook. Dry land flourishes when watered with humility. She didn't yet know if it was a thought, a confession, or a plea for forgiveness. But it was the first stirring of something new within her. The next morning, Isabel woke early, determined to better understand the world she had previously despised. She walked to the barn, curious about the space where she had seen the old photograph. The smell of hay and machine oil mingled with the metallic sound of tools. Pedro, the farm foreman, was there organizing equipment. He greeted her with a respectful nod and a small smile. "It's been a while since we've had a visitor from the city around here," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Isabel smiled shyly back. "I can imagine. I used to think this place was the end of the world." Pedro chuckled. "To outsiders, it certainly seems like it. But to those who grow crops here, it's the beginning of everything." The answer surprised her. Simple and true, like almost everything in that place. Pedro showed her a corner of the barn that held old photos and inherited tools. Among them, Isabel found a yellowed album with childhood photos. There she and Rafael were smiling beneath the same sun that now illuminated the farm. In one of the photos, the two held a tree sapling. On the back, a note from her mother, "Grow together like this root." The words hit her hard. Isabel ran her fingers over the photo and felt her heart ache. "He never threw any of it away," she said quietly. Pedro nodded. "Your brother keeps everything he remembers about the family, even the painful things." Isabel closed the album slowly, trying to contain her emotion. This was the Rafael she had forgotten, the boy she dreamed of, not the man she had underestimated. Back at home, Lucia noticed her niece's teary eyes. "You found the past, didn't you?" she asked tenderly. Isabel simply nodded, showing the photo. "I laughed at him for dreaming of this land, Aunt, and he believed it all on his own." Lucia held her hand. "It's not always too late to apologize, my daughter. But first, you must forgive yourself for not believing." Her aunt's words echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. Isabel spent hours walking around the farm, watching the workers, the children playing, the birds perching on the tall corn. It was as if every corner of the place whispered of what she had lost, the value of simplicity, the meaning of patience. As the sun began to set, she saw Rafael in the distance, gathering tools and talking to Pedro. For a moment she considered approaching, but something held her back. She still didn't have the courage to meet his gaze. Instead, she returned home and put the photo in her suitcase, a silent reminder of everything she had destroyed with her words. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She opened her notebook again and wrote, "He who sows contempt reaps distance." Outside, the wind blew hard, banging against the windows, as if the earth confirmed what she had just written.
The next day, Isabel decided not to postpone the inevitable any longer. She knew Rafael hadn't invited her there out of kindness, but out of politeness. She, in turn, needed to be honest. She waited until late afternoon when he returned from the fields and found him in his office, reviewing spreadsheets and contracts. The scene made her smile discreetly. He looked more like a businessman than a farmer. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. Rafael looked up, showing no sign of surprise. "Yes." Isabel took a deep breath and got straight to the point. "I came to ask for your help." The words seemed to hang heavy in the air. He put down his pen and leaned back in his chair, observing her silently. "Help? he repeated, as if confirming the obvious before weighing the intentions behind it. I lost everything, Rafael. I invested in the wrong people, in empty promises, and now I have nothing left. She tried to keep her voice steady, but emotion escaped. I know I don't deserve to ask, after everything I said to you, but I have no one else to turn to. Rafael listened to her without interrupting. When she finished, the silence felt like a verdict. Finally, he said with almost cruel calm, "Not every harvest deserves to be saved, Isabel." The sentence struck her like a sharp blow. "I'm not asking for charity," she replied in a small voice. "I'm asking for a chance." Rafael stood up, walking to the window. "No one gave me the chances I needed. I dug them with my own hands." Isabel tried to move closer, but he held up his hand, signaling distance. "You don't understand, Rafael. I did what I thought was right." "Right for whom? For you? Because for me, you did what hurt the most." The words were simple, but charged with years of pent-up pain. She lowered her head, feeling the weight of regret. "I know, I was cruel. I just didn't want you to suffer if you failed." Rafael took a deep breath, controlling the anger that washed over him in waves. "I needed to fail, Isabel. That's how we learn. But you wanted to be my failure." The silence that followed was piercing. Isabel took a step back, overcome with shame and guilt. "If I could go back, I'd do things differently." Rafael replied without looking at her. "The problem is, time doesn't accept excuses." He returned to the table and resumed his paperwork, ending the conversation with the dry sound of pen on paper. Isabel left the office without another word. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, and the first stars were appearing over the countryside. She sat on the porch and let the tears fall freely. For the first time in years, she was crying not for the loss of her money, but for the loss of her brother. Rafael, inside the office, stared out at the moonlit fields. As much as he tried to shield his heart, he knew those tears echoed within him too. But he wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The next morning, the farm awoke to a frenzy, but Isabel felt static, caught between regret and pride. She tried to find ways to redeem herself, but each gesture seemed too small compared to the abyss she had created. Lucia, noticing her niece's dejection, invited her to help in the kitchen. "Helping nourishes the spirit, Isabel," she said in her calm tone. She accepted, and that was the first time in years that her hands had touched something simple and real.
As they chopped vegetables, Lucia told stories of Rafael's youth, of the nights he studied by lamplight, the times he was doubted, the days he cried alone. Isabel listened silently, each word piercing like a fine needle. "He never gave up, even when all seemed lost," her aunt concluded. Isabel replied in a whisper, "I laughed at him while he struggled." Lucia dried her hands and looked at her niece. "It's easy to laugh, my daughter. It's hard to believe." Isabel lowered her head, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. "I just wanted him to have a safe life." Her aunt shook her head. "You wanted him to have your own life, and you forgot that everyone is born with a different soil to flourish." The words sounded like a sweet and true sermon. After lunch, Isabel decided to walk to the vegetable garden. The smell of damp earth and the bird song enveloped her. She watched the workers chatting and laughing as they tended the plants. That simple harmony touched her more than any motivational speech she had ever heard in her career. It was there that her brother found meaning in life. Suddenly, Rafael appeared, holding a hoe. "Are you running away from the city, are you?" he asked with a hint of irony. Isabel smiled in surprise. "Maybe I'm running away from myself." He didn't answer, just began working beside her. They fell silent, the sound of metal against earth filling the space between them. It was the most sincere conversation they'd had in years. Isabel bent down and began to help him. At first she struggled, but soon learned the rhythm of the earth. Rafael watched, surprised but without comment. When they finished, she looked down at her dirty hands and laughed softly. "It's been a while since I've gotten my hands dirty for something worthwhile." Rafael replied with a half-smile. "Maybe this is the start of something good." As they returned home, Lucia watched them from a distance and smiled discreetly. He knew something was beginning to change, even if neither of them would admit it. At the table, Isabel felt a new lightness, as if some of her guilt had dissolved into the land she now knew so intimately. Later, alone in her room, she reflected on how many times she had belittled her brother's efforts. Now she saw that the farm wasn't just a business venture, it was a testament to faith. Rafael didn't build wealth, he built purpose, and that was what she had always sought without knowing where to find it. Before going to sleep, Isabel wrote in her notebook, "The root grows in the dark, but only blossoms when it finds light." For the first time, he slept without fear of tomorrow.
A storm descended on the farm that night. Lightning streaked the sky, and the wind howled through the cracks in the windows. Isabel woke with a start, her heart racing. She got up and went to the living room, trying to find a candle. The light had gone out, and the sound of rain on the roof echoed like distant memories. The darkness seemed to whisper her name. As she searched for a flashlight, something made her stop. The creaking of the floorboards, the sound of the wind, everything seemed to gain a voice. It was as if the house were speaking, and between the lines of that living silence, she heard fragments of the past. Hick, ungrateful, loser. Words she herself had spoken. Their sound was louder than the thunder. Isabel sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, overcome by memories of the dinners where she had ridiculed her brother. Every laugh echoed like a ghost's now. "Why did I do that?" she murmured between sobs. Outside, the rain washed the earth, and inside her, something was also beginning to be cleansed. Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the room for a second, and she saw, hanging on the wall, the same painting that always faced inward. She slowly stood up and turned it over. It was a family photo. Her parents, Rafael, and herself, all smiling. The painting was covered in dust, but the faces looked alive. "Why did they hide this?" she whispered. Lucia appeared with a flashlight, startled by the noise. "Isabel, what happened?" Her niece pointed to the painting. "Why was he turned, Aunt?" The woman sighed sadly. "Rafael turned after last Christmas when you fought. He said he didn't want to look at a memory that only hurt anymore." Isabel felt the silent tears fall. "I destroyed everything, Aunt. Everything." Lucia approached and hugged her. "No, my daughter, you only forgot what truly matters, and forgetting is human, but remembering is human too." The two of them held each other for a while, listening to the storm calm down. When the wind died down, the silence of the farm felt different. Isabel sat before the painting, observing Rafael's childhood smile. It was the same look he still had, only now hardened by pain. "I want to fix what I broke," she murmured to herself. She wiped away her tears and wrote in her notebook by flashlight, "The voices of the past do not condemn me, they call me to begin again." Then she put the painting back on the wall, facing outwards, giving back to the house the face of the family that had been so difficult to see. As she lay in bed, she heard the distant sound of a rooster crowing before dawn. She smiled, tired, but at peace. She knew forgiveness was still a long way off, but for the first time, she felt the path to it had begun. The morning sun illuminated the porch as Isabel stepped out into the fresh air. The smell of wet earth still lingered in the air after the storm. Rafael was already in the field giving instructions to the workers, and she watched him from afar, feeling a mixture of guilt and admiration. His every gesture seemed natural, the fruit of years of discipline and purpose. That quiet strength was what most disconcerted her.
Pedro approached, carrying an old box. "Good morning, Mrs. Isabel. I found this in the storage room, and I think it belongs to your brother. He asked me to bring it home." Isabel, curious, took the object and noticed the rusty padlock. "Can I open it?" she asked. Pedro shrugged. "If it's to bring peace, perhaps I should." And he left, leaving her alone with the mystery. Back in her room, Isabel forced the lock until it broke. Inside was a stack of yellowed envelopes, all with her handwriting on the addressee, Isabel Duarte. Her heart raced. One by one, he opened the envelopes and began reading the letters. They were messages written by Rafael over the years they hadn't spoken. In each letter, he spoke of attempts, failures, hopes, and dreams. He wrote about how much it hurt not to have his sister's support, but also about how he wanted to prove, not to her, but to himself, that he could overcome without resentment. The words were simple, yet soulful. "I forgive you every day, even without you knowing it," read one letter. Isabel wept uncontrollably. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the words. She realized Rafael had never sent them, not out of pride, but out of love. He wanted to spare her the burden of guilt. Each letter was an attempt at closeness that fear had prevented. And now, too late, she read what she had always needed to hear. Clutching one of the letters to her chest, Isabel walked down to the porch. The sun was beating down, and the countryside seemed to glow. "You were always better than I thought, Rafael," she murmured. But the wind carried her words away, as if the earth itself wanted to keep them. Later, Lucia found Isabel sitting on the porch with swollen eyes. "You read it, didn't you?" Isabel nodded. "He forgave me before I even asked, and I never asked." Lucia smiled sadly. "Forgiveness, my daughter, is like planting a seed. Sometimes it only sprouts when the right rain comes." That night, Elizabeth collected all the letters and tied them with ribbon. She put them back in the box, but this time without the lock. She placed it on Rafael's desk with a simple note. "I read everything, and I cried over everything. Isabel." It was the beginning of the real dialogue they never had. Lying down, she looked out the window and saw the moonlight bathing the fields. For the first time in years, she felt at home. The next morning, Rafael found the box in his office. Reading Isabel's note, he was silent for a long time. He ran his fingers over the paper, feeling his heart tighten. The letters had been written in moments of solitude when he needed to convince himself that brotherly love still had value. Knowing she had read them completely disarmed him. Later, he found her near the lake, gazing at the reflections in the water. Isabel turned nervously. "Did you read it?" she asked. Rafael nodded, his face unreadable. "I did." The silence that followed was thick, but less hostile than before. "I didn't know you still cared about me," she confessed, her eyes welling up. Rafael took a deep breath before answering. "Isabel, I never stopped caring. I just learned to live without expecting anything." The words hurt him as much as they hurt her. Isabel approached hesitantly. "I didn't come here to redeem myself, Rafael. I came because I don't know who I am anymore, and somehow I thought you were still my home." He looked away, trying to contain his emotion. "The home you destroyed," he replied, without rancor, but with sadness. "But maybe we can still rebuild." Isabel nodded, crying. "I don't want your money or your pity. I just want you to let me try to be your sister again." Her sincerity broke something inside him. The wind blew rightly, and Rafael looked at the horizon, reflecting. Forgiveness isn't a button, Isabel. It's a process. And to begin with, you'll have to learn what it means to truly plant. She smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Then teach me." In the following days, the two began working together on the farm. Rafael demonstrated the details of cultivation, and Isabel, though clumsy, learned quickly. Between conversations, shy laughter emerged, like small flowers after rain. It was a silent but real new beginning. One afternoon, as they walked through the fields, Isabel asked, "Have you never hated me, Rafael?" He thought for a moment before answering. "No. Hatred is a seed that dries up the soil. I just stopped watering love for a while." The answer brought tears to her eyes. That night, Isabel sat alone, watching the sunset. The sky painted orange and lilac. For the first time, the silence between them didn't hurt. It was a peaceful silence. Rafael, from across the porch, watched his sister and smiled softly. He knew there was still much healing to do, but he felt the earth and his heart were finally ready to blossom again. The following weeks brought a new kind of routine for Isabel. Now her mornings began early, accompanying Rafael to the fields. She learned the difference between fertile and tired soil, the right time to sow, and the value of waiting. Each lesson about the earth felt like a metaphor for life. "The secret isn't to plant quickly," Rafael would say. "It's knowing how to wait for the right time to harvest." The onset of an unexpected drought faced the farm difficult days. The heat was relentless, the ground was beginning to crack, and the water in the reservoirs was slowly receding. Rafael remained calm, but Isabel saw the concern in his eyes. "If it doesn't rain by the end of the month, we'll lose a good portion of our production," he explained. Those words rekindled an old fear in her.
This time, however, Isabel didn't run away. She gathered her courage and looked for solutions. "Maybe we can install an automated irrigation system. I know it's expensive, but I can help find investors." Rafael looked at her suspiciously. "Do you think you can solve everything with spreadsheets and contracts?" She took a deep breath. "No, but we can try. And I learned that from you." Over the next few days, Isabel immersed herself in calculations and budgets, using her financial knowledge to devise alternatives. Gradually, Rafael began to respect her dedication. He no longer saw her as just the arrogant woman who had once ridiculed him, but as someone willing to learn and to make amends. The drought, which had previously seemed like a punishment, now became an opportunity for bonding. When it finally rained, after weeks of waiting, the entire farm celebrated. Rafael walked out into the field with his arms open, laughing under the water, while Isabel wept with relief. "The rain comes to those who don't give up," he said, looking up at the sky. Isabel replied with a smile, "Or to those who learn to deserve it." That moment marked a turning point. Their relationship became lighter, even fun some days. Isabel found herself laughing at little things, the sound of frogs after the rain, Pedro's jokes, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. It was as if the farm was healing her one day at a time. One calm afternoon, Rafael invited her to see the new crop. "These seeds are different, more drought-resistant. I learned from my mistakes." Isabel smiled. "You always learn from your mistakes, right?" He replied, "And you're learning now." They laughed together, for the first time without a heavy heart. As the sun set, Isabel reflected on how life could change when pride gave way to humility. Now she understood, success wasn't about conquering others, but conquering oneself. Later, when writing in his notebook, he wrote, "The harvest is not the end of work, it is the beginning of recognition." And when he closed the notebook, he felt that he was reaping something much more valuable than money: reconciliation with his own past. The night was cool as Isabel and Rafael sat on the porch, sharing the silence that had once separated them. The stars covered the sky like a carpet of memories. Isabel held a cup of tea, trying to find courage. "There's something I need to tell you," she began. Rafael turned to her attentive. "Go ahead." "I was always afraid of you, Rafael. Not afraid of what you could do, but of what you represented. You never needed approval, never wanted to prove anything to anyone. I always needed that." He remained silent, just listening. Her words hung in the air like a belated confession. Isabel continued, "When you bought that land, I laughed because I couldn't stand the idea of you being right. I was surrounded by powerful people, but I never felt free. And seeing you abandon everything to follow your instincts made me feel small." A tear fell, but her smile was one of relief. "I think I ridiculed you because I wanted to be like you." Rafael was silent for a moment, staring out at the moonlit field. "I was afraid too, Isabel. Afraid of being insignificant, of disappointing. When you called me a dreamer, I pretended not to care, but it hurt. But deep down, your words taught me to shut up and work." She looked at him tenderly. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Rafael." He took a deep breath. "Maybe I don't, but forgiveness isn't earned. If it were, no one would have it." His words disarmed her. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the silence of mutual understanding. Suddenly, a gentle breeze blew across the porch, gently lifting the note Isabel had left on the letterbox. She picked it up and read it again. "I read it all, and I cried over it all." Rafael smiled. "I cried too when I wrote it." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. They stood side by side, staring out at the dark field that held years of hurt and longing. "Thank you for still letting me be here. Thank you for coming back." No words could have carried more weight. That night, Isabel fell asleep soundly, and Rafael, lying in his room, lay awake for a while, listening to the sound of crickets. He thought about his sister and the long road they had traveled to find each other. Before going to sleep, he murmured to himself, "Sometimes forgiveness is just the beginning of a new seed." The following days brought a quiet peace to the farm, but Rafael knew the calm never lasted long. One morning, Pedro hurried into the office, bringing bad news. A plague was spreading through the crops in the northern sector. Rafael stood up immediately, his expression tense. "Call everyone. Let's act before it spreads." Isabel followed him, worried, without hesitation. The field bustled with activity. Workers scurried back and forth, spraying pesticides and isolating affected areas. Isabel watched everything, trying to help. "What can I do?" she asked. Rafael, focused, replied without looking, "Stay out of this. This is hard work." But she didn't listen. She grabbed the mask and began helping the others, mixing solutions and carrying buckets. Her strength and determination surprised everyone, including Rafael. Hours later, with the sun setting, the plague seemed to be under control. Isabel was exhausted, covered in dirt and sweat, but she was smiling. "I think I finally made myself useful." Rafael looked at her with genuine admiration. "You were more than useful. You were brave." Later, sitting on the porch, he handed her a glass of water, and for the first time, the silence between them was comforting. Isabel took a deep breath. "I never would have done that a few months ago. I would have turned and run away." Rafael laughed. "Yeah, And I would have let you go without saying a word. Their laughter echoed through the night, light as a harvest breeze. The moment, however, was interrupted by a memory Isabel couldn't contain. You know, Rafael, when you started all this, I bet a coworker that you wouldn't last a year here. The confession came like a knife to the flesh. Rafael was silent for a moment, staring at the field. Then he replied, "And you lost." She smiled, embarrassed. "I lost, and I deserved it." Rafael looked at the horizon and said calmly, "Isabel, I held a lot of anger towards you, for years. But today, seeing everything we've been through, I think that anger has brought me nothing. It's only kept me trapped in a time that's already past." His words hung in the air, soft and firm. Isabel, overcome with emotion, placed her hand over his. "I hurt you so much. If I could go back—" Rafael interrupted. "You don't have to go back. Just stay. It's enough." Their eyes filled with tears, but there was peace there. Forgiveness didn't come as a dramatic gesture, but rather like a breeze that entered unbidden. Rafael stood up and hugged her for the first time in years. "You didn't have to be perfect, Isabel. You just had to be my sister." The phrase echoed within her like liberation. That night, the field seemed greener, the sky brighter, the world lighter. Isabel understood that forgiveness wasn't the end of a cycle, it was a new beginning. Months had passed since the plague, and the farm had become a symbol of renewal. Rafael and Isabel now worked side by side, making decisions together and learning from each other. He taught them about the land, she about management and sustainability. "You finally found a way to unite our stubborn minds," Lucia joked, watching them with pride. Their relationship, once marked by wounds, now blossomed into complicity. Arguments still existed, but were accompanied by laughter. "You're still stubborn," Isabel would say. "And you still talk too much," he would retort. It was the kind of sincere love only siblings know, full of irony and disguised affection. One day, Rafael called her over to the freshly plowed field. These lands were unproductive until recently, but with the system you suggested, we'll be able to double the harvest. Isabel smiled, feeling genuine pride. "So now you're the one learning from me?" he teased. "No, I'll just let you figure that out," he replied, laughing. The farm began receiving visits from other cooperatives and producers interested in the sustainable model they had created together. Isabel, once a symbol of arrogance, now spoke humbly about the value of starting over. Everything big was once small, and sometimes broken, she told the visitors.
One afternoon, Rafael found her sitting under a tree, reading a notebook of old notes. "Is that the diary of our fights?" he joked. Isabel smiled. "No, it's the diary of what I learned here. And you know what I realized? You were always right. Not about the farm, but about life." He sat beside her, resting his hat on his knee. "And you were right about one thing, too." Isabel arched an eyebrow. "About what?" Rafael replied, "Earth isn't for everyone, but neither is love. It requires care, patience, and a good dose of stubbornness." They stood there in silence, watching the wind rustle the leaves. It was the kind of moment that needed no words, the kind of peace that only comes after a storm. Isabel rested her head on her brother's shoulder. "I think we finally learned to plant what matters." Rafael smiled. "And we still have much to reap." The sun set slowly, tinting the sky golden. Lucia watched from the porch, moved, certain that the family's wounds had finally healed. That night, Isabel wrote in her notebook, "Some seeds bloom late, but when they do, they change the whole field." The sun was rising gently as the first preparations began. The farm was in a festive mood.
It would be the inauguration day of the new Sustainable Research Center, the fruit of Rafael and Isabel's joint work. Workers, neighboring families, and representatives of the cooperative gathered under the large shed adorned with wildflowers. The air smelled of fresh bread and hope. Isabel walked among the guests with a calm smile. Gone was the arrogant glow of old, only serenity. When someone called her doctor, she laughed. No one here is a doctor, only an apprentice of the land. People admired her change, but few knew how much tears and humility that transformation had cost. Rafael, for his part, maintained the same calm expression, but within him lay a silent gratitude. Seeing his sister talking to the workers, he remembered the day she'd arrived there, lost, trying to buy with apologies the forgiveness she'd now earned with her actions. She's blossomed, and so have I. During the ceremony, Lucio was called upon to deliver the opening address. With a choked voice, she said, "When the earth is tended with love, even what seemed dry returns to fruition, and the same goes for the heart." The audience applauded, and Rafael discreetly took his sister's hand. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning, a symbol of a restored bond. After the applause, Isabel took the small makeshift stage. I spent years believing that success meant being above others, but here I learned that true success is growing together. This place taught me more than any office. It taught me to wait, to make mistakes, and to start over. Her words were simple, but they resonated deeply with everyone who listened. At the end of the event, Rafael and Isabel walked to the field, now full of newly planted green shoots. The wind blew gently, as if blessing this new cycle. "Remember when I said your land was dry?" Isabel asked, laughing. "I remember, and I still find it funny seeing you here with your boots covered in mud."
Well, yeah, she said, kicking the dust with a smile. I think clay was what I needed to put down roots. Rafael looked at her and replied, "Clay is what binds us to the earth and to the truth." They were silent for a moment, listening to the sound of cicadas and the rustling of leaves. Suddenly, the sky began to turn golden. Isabel sighed. "You know, Rafa, thank you for not letting me go when I wanted to run away the most." He smiled, touching her shoulder. "You never would have gotten very far. Your roots were always here. They were just hidden." Emotion overwhelmed Isabel. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Now I understand. You didn't need me to grow. I needed you to blossom." Rafael hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of 10 years lift in that instant. "We needed each other, Isabel. It just took us a while to realize it." As the sun set, the fields reflected a golden glow, the same golden glow she had once mocked for calling dry land. Now it was a symbol of life, forgiveness, and rebirth. And in the silence that followed, Isabel wrote in her notebook for the last time, "Forgiveness is the hardest harvest, but also the most fertile." If this story touched your heart, subscribe now and activate the bell, because here, each new video is a fresh harvest of emotions. After all, life may be full of droughts, but those who believe always find the right time to blossom.